Alright, hi guys. It's a very, very exciting morning. We have 4 extremely distinguished guests, all from different fields of work, but all united in their interest in ASEAN and the arts. Alright, so in the morning we heard Mr. Purushothaman talk about ASEAN. Oh, am I speaking very loudly? Alright, in the morning we heard Mr. Purushothaman talk about arts, and in ASEAN especially, and making it very contextualized. And also talking about the advent of social media actually, because we are all young and we all use Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook to interact. So, before we start the panel discussions, I would like to invite the speakers to give a brief introduction about themselves, maybe a 1 to 2 minute. Am I still speaking too loudly? Am I right? Oh, alright. So 1 to 2 minutes, a brief introduction about yourself, and the next 5 minutes to set the context of the panel. So the question that they'll be answering is this: given ASEAN's diversity, what can ASEAN do to harness the arts and culture of the region to build a regional identity or an ASEAN identity? Alright, so how the panel works is, after this brief, we would like to invite all participants to go up to the stand in the middle of the hall to ask a question. Alright, I'll take 3 questions at a time. When you ask your question, just say your name and where you're from, and then after that, say your question. Alright, so I think let's start from Prof. Kevin, who happens to be also my Prof.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here and attending this wonderful conference on a Sunday. First of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Kevin Tan. My day job is really as a law professor, so I teach law at NUS Faculty of Law as well as at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. But in addition to my day job, I also do a number of things coming from sort of the people sector in the NGO. And as Sean was saying, or as I was being introduced just now, I spent 10 years being the president of the Singapore Heritage Society, and then currently I'm president of E-Commerce Singapore. In these capacities, my main interest has been largely local rather than regional. In other words, focused primarily on Singapore. And what have we been looking at so far as Singapore is concerned is the preservation both of the built as well as the intangible heritage of Singapore. Now, Singapore, as I think we've seen that urbanization to graph that Venka showed just now, Singapore has been urbanized since 2005. And the big challenge in Singapore has always been, it's a contestation for space. How do we best utilize the little bit of space that we have for as many people as we have in Singapore? Do we build more golf courses? Do we build more institutions? Or do we leave space to fallow for people to use as public spaces and so on? These are the challenges that we've been facing. And one of them has been, because of rapid development, rapid urban development, the mass destruction of many parts of the built heritage of Singapore. Things that we kind of look at now and say, oh, isn't this very pretty? Isn't this all part of the parcel of our heritage? In fact, as we speak right now, I'm fighting a big battle with the Land Transport Authority over the impending, not potential, but impending destruction of 2 more pieces of our built heritage, one of which is the original site of the Singapore Polytechnic, now known as Bestway Building, another one which is the building that was the home of the Chinese Metropolitan YMCA building, now known as Palmer House. So these are the kinds of battles that I have been fighting, for the last decade and a half. So, shall I carry on into my talk, or do you pass on this? Yes, I should go on. Okay. All right. So now, my spiel for this morning, looking at how we can craft an ASEAN identity, looking at arts and culture. I want to start by saying that I agree with everything that Venka has said just now. So then I'm not quite sure how much more I could add to that. So for that, I am going to make just 3 points. First, the idea of an ASEAN identity Someone said just now, oh, there's never been a meeting or a conference talking about ASEAN identity. And I said, well, for good reason, because there isn't one. So, one of your tasks, of course, is to try and see, well, if this is actually something that we might want to forge. I suppose the first question we need to ask ourselves is, why do we want an ASEAN identity? Right? Is it very important for us to have an ASEAN identity? There is, of course, the political imperative out there, which is that ASEAN is to be a community. It's already an economic community as of the end of last year, and then it has been, building up towards a much more integrated society. But the challenges in ASEAN, as Venka rightly pointed out, is that we are basically an archipelagic regional organization. There is a great deal to be said for contiguous land masses, such as in Europe, where one country may be a different country from another, but it's really very close by, and the differences are not that stark. But for those of us who travel a little bit within Southeast Asia, in fact anywhere, one thing you will quickly realize is that one island is very different from another island. You may be within the same polity, but one island is different from another island already. Right? And if you just imagine, we've got two of the world's biggest archipelagos in Southeast Asia, Indonesia as well as the Philippines. And well, actually, I haven't yet heard of anybody who's tried to visit every single island. I don't think it's physically possible. If you visit one a day. Okay, I'm not good with math, but you work out the math, because the 13,000 islands in Indonesia, another 11,000 or something in the Philippines. So I think you couldn't do it in a lifetime. But anyhow, think about it. Everyone is so diverse. So if you're trying to sort of look for commonalities, then I think you've got to go beyond sort of the distinct kind of cultures, and maybe the kind of identity that we might have is a little bit more like something that we are quite used to in Singapore, which is actually, when we talk about Singapore identity, what we do is we celebrate our diversity as opposed to our commonalities. We try and find commonalities because we need to live with one another, but we actually celebrate our diversities. I'm not quite sure it's so easily conveniently divided as the government does into your sort of major ethnic races, Chinese, Malay, Indian, and so-called others, this horrible category called others, right? But it's not quite so simple. But the point is that we actually celebrate diversity, which is quite good. We need a common language as a platform to build this, and history, unfortunately, has created major problems for us, right? It is because of our colonial past that current boundaries are being drawn. In fact, the boundary between Indonesia and Malaysia was largely drawn after the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1824. So, the fact that Singapore, culturally, historically, is very, very close to the Liao Islands in Indonesia, in the Batam, Bintang, and the other islands around there, makes no difference today. Today, that's Indonesia, and Singapore is Singapore. Right? So, these artificial boundaries have been drafted. We live with that, and the question then is, how do we actually find ways to put them together? So my first point here is that, yes, I agree with what Venka has said just now, that history, colonialism continue to be major hangovers which we are suffering from. And this is something that we need to deal with. Now, the other problem which I see as an impediment to developing a more holistic culture and identity within ASEAN is, of course, the ASEAN way. Venka talks about it as politeness and non-confrontation, but it's called the ASEAN way. In other words, let's not interfere with what people are doing in each of their own countries. State sovereignty as a concept becomes primary in the idea of the ASEAN way. In other words, one state will not interfere in the affairs of another state. To me, this is very divisive. If you are trying to forge a general consensus, you need to have greater dialogue, and sometimes in such dialogues, difficult questions and issues will have to be confronted head-on rather than swept under the carpet. There is, of course, like I said, these divisions have actually been things that infect us. Since I've been invited here as being president of ICOMOS, let me just share very quickly one of the sort of behind the scenes stories when we were bidding for the World Heritage Site for the Botanic Gardens. Now, first of all, ICOMOS actually is the technical arm of UNESCO, and so advises UNESCO as to whether or not a site should or should not be inscribed as a national heritage or universal, as a World Heritage Site. But because we are the Singapore ICOMOS, we cannot, of course, advise UNESCO on anything because we have a vested interest. So all we could do was to actually advise the bid panel as to how best to position the bid so that we think we would meet all the criteria necessary for us to get the inscription. And one of the things that popped up during the discussions was, and it actually appears in the bid document, this is ASEAN Studies. We tried to position Singapore as the best preserved of the colonial gardens in Southeast Asia. It's not the oldest. At first, somebody thought it was the oldest, but the oldest is actually in Indonesia, right? And so the question then is, okay, how do we then distinguish our gardens from that of the Indonesian gardens? And here statism comes in, national pride comes in. It's not very ASEAN, but Singapore wants the inscription, right? So then in a way you can say, well, if you want to look at the gardens in Indonesia, not very well maintained, but ours is much better, and so on, right? So doesn't work, doesn't help forge identity. My second point I want to make is that if you want, my time's up. Okay, then I will say it in two sentences. First one is that you have to make a community. In order for you to make a community, you must first have an identity. How do we decide who we are, what we are? And the third point I want to make, and this is in a way covered by some of what the keynote has already covered, which is that it is absolutely necessary for us to create dialogue. And arts and culture provide the lowest entry barrier for us going into this, because you don't really need to know a language to understand good music. You don't really need to know a language if you watch a good movie. It will appeal to us in a universal sense. Okay.
Alright, now we have Liao to speak to us about what he does and also answer the question on ASEAN identity.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Liao Jiekai. I'm a Singaporean filmmaker, artist, and also educator. Maybe a little bit more background about myself. I started making videos about 16 years ago, and really went into making films maybe 7 years ago. That was a time when I just returned to Singapore for my studies in the States, and I formed a filmmakers collective with a few friends. We call ourselves 13 Little Pictures, and it's a small kind of it's a collective because we are not exactly a for-profit production company. So we started making independent films, both short films and feature-length films, and also we kind of see that in independent filmmaking, it's important that we have like-minded peers to support each other, which is why we kind of banded together. And we are still making films today. Besides that, I'm also I teach at the School of the Arts Singapore, which is a local arts-focused high school for the arts. And I also sometimes do some projects that's more within the visual art settings, like showing video installations in museums and galleries. So that's my background. Okay, let me move on to answering that. For me, it's kind of like a big question, because it's actually a question that Southeast Asian identity is something that I never asked myself as a creator, or something that even as a teen, it's something that maybe I never thought about or tackled in the films or the artwork that I make, because I think identity is something that's very inherent, and then you kind of just, I don't kind of deal with it very specific, in a very specific way. So maybe I will just talk about some of the ideas of what I think, about how within the world of film, like how maybe some Southeast Asian filmmakers band together or come together and talk about how they are kind of related to each other geographically. I think that Southeast Asian cinema, the films that are made in this region were not very prominent internationally until about, I think, 15, 16 years ago, post-millennium, when, we start hearing the words like Malaysia New Wave, Filipino New Wave, and international film festivals started having group showcases of films coming from different countries in Southeast Asia, especially I think in Thailand, Malaysia, and Philippines. The cinemas, the independent films very prominently showcased in the past 10 years. And it culminated to, I think, about a few years ago when a Thai filmmaker, Apichatpong Wirasengku, won the first Palme d'Or award at the Cannes Film Festival for his film, Uncle Who Can Recall His Past Life, which was, everybody was celebrating, how first time a Southeast Asian film director won a prestigious award at the French Film Festival. So I think that kind of created some kind of solidarity. I think at how Southeast Asian filmmakers relate to each other. And personally, there's a lot of things that I experience, or whether going to film festivals or as an educator, that kind of frames this Southeast Asian identity. For example, the collective that with 32 Pictures, we organized Southeast Asian film lab. We organized it twice. The first time in 2012 and the second time in 2013, where we invited filmmakers from all over Southeast Asia to come to. The first time was held in Singapore, to come together and we have some dialogue and talk to each other and kind of make films together and learn from each other about each other's culture and our filmmaking practices. So I think that there's always a lot of, like I said previously, a lot of solidarity. I think when we come together, and also because within the world cinema we are such a neglected bunch for so many years. So like when I go to film festivals, I think the Southeast Asian filmmakers were always like together, either like singing and karaoke, or like going to like some Asian restaurant to eat, So that I think that there is that kind of we relate to each other based on our background and where we come from. There's also, I think, the idea of making films together. Like about 2 years ago, a Malaysian filmmaker, Tan Chui Wei Shi, invited a few Southeast Asian film directors to get together to make an omnibus collection of short films that will be showcased together as one singular feature film. And her topic of interest was, I think, Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia. So she invited kind of filmmakers of Chinese origin from different Southeast Asian countries to write stories and I think talk about it, and I think using film as a way to connect, these countries together. Yeah. And I think that personally, I agree with some of the points I mentioned earlier about diversity. I think that we never really talk about a Southeast Asian identity because, in the first place, I'm not really sure whether there is a need to, because we are different in the first place. Although there's also a lot of cultural similarities between us because of where we come from. Maybe to talk a little bit about specifically Singapore, because I think that is where I'm coming from. I think that language in particular is a very tricky thing. Like because I think so much of I think identity is defined by language. And in Singapore, when we make a movie, we are always thinking about what language to make it at, because of like for example in our local television, we have a English language channel, a Malay language channel, Chinese language channel, and you hardly hear any kind of other languages used in the different TV shows in the specific language-specific channels because of the market that they are targeting and because of policies that they don't allow, like in the Chinese. The Chinese television, you never really hear other languages, and which is different actually from the way in Singapore we experience it in our day-to-day life, where we speak in so many, we communicate with our neighbors, our friends, with so many different kind of English and Chinese and a little bit of dialect, and sometimes we mix it with Malay, So I think that language is something that's always in my mind when I make my films, and sometimes representation becomes also another thing. Like people will ask me, like why is your film in this particular part of the film all Chinese people? Where are your Indian friends? And then you start to question yourself, this representation or intentionally, mixing in all these. Is it necessary, or because I primarily look at myself as a Chinese or filmmaker, and hence I end up telling stories that are more that involve more Chinese people. So I think that's another question that's very tricky. I find myself I always have that problem because I don't want to just put in characters that are of different race just for the sake. So I think those are some of the questions that I think about when I'm making films.
So basically, let me just take this time to summarize what Prof. and Mr. Lai said, so you all can internalize them before Mr. Purushothaman and Ms. Thuzar speaks. Right. So basically, if you notice, the tone of what Prof. is trying to say is really there's this diversity in this region, right? But at the same time, when you look at the individual filmmakers, when you look at the individual artists, there's some kind of solidarity that connects them. Perhaps it's a geographical thing, perhaps it's a food thing, but there's something connecting them. So this is something you can keep in mind when you're trying to pose your questions. Through diversity, there's some kind of unity. And there's some kind of intangible thing that's connecting everyone. And if you remember what Mr. Purushothaman talked about in the keynote address, there's this connection that perhaps you all should think about. How do you connect people from this region? Alright? So giving this, I think I should give some time to Ms. Thuzar to share about herself and also to talk about the ASEAN identity.
Thank you, Sean. Very good morning to everyone. And a big thank you to all my co-panelists. It's great to start off your Sunday morning like this. It's very energizing. And no, I really mean it. No, seriously. That's how people of my age kind of develop vampiric tendencies by being in the company of younger ones and kind of getting energy from your collective energy. And it's a little bit along that line that I'd like to explore in taking further the theme about ASEAN identity through arts and culture. Now, I would be the first to agree with the speakers before me of saying that there is no such thing as an ASEAN identity. And yes, it kind of sounds sacrilegious because, I've worked for ASEAN for practically the whole of my career. But why I say there is no such thing as an ASEAN identity is because ASEAN is not a geographical construct. It is a political construct. It is an institution, it is a process that, of course, defines how governments in this region carry out their relations, interstate, intergovernmental relations with each other through many collaborative, cooperative activities. But the identity that we have as citizens of the countries in this region is that of Southeast Asians. And even if you go further back in history, you would say there is no such thing as Southeast Asia until World War II, under the British when they established the Southeast Asia Command in, interestingly, Sri Lanka. But anyway, if we talk about a regional identity, then I think we're talking more about who are we as citizens of this region of Southeast Asia that participate in different intergovernmental, bilateral, multilateral processes under this regional umbrella called ASEAN. And of course, if you bring the parallel to the European Union, they don't call themselves an EU identity, they say a European identity. But of course, for them, the similarity of culture, history, religion, to a certain extent, form that basis. So I'm going to dive straight into telling you a bit about who I am, together with the 3 I's of a regional identity that I want to explore in the next 5 to 7 minutes that I have. So, identity with a big I at the regional level is, of course, comprised of all these discrete individual identities. At the national level, you can have your historical identity, you can have your social, your political identity, you can have your cultural identity, but it's really based on, I think, what Professor Tan highlighted about the rather arbitrary administrative constructs that we all went through when the geography of Southeast Asia was being shaped, partly under the colonial masters, and partly as part of finding the geographical niche, as it were. There are most of us in this region who still haven't found that particular geographical niche, even though we are all located in the same region. So based on those different discrete identities that make up what goes into a regional identity, I'll share you one personal anecdote about myself and how I am rather a split personality in self-identification. Of course, as my name connotes, and most of you will know, there are also some of my compatriots in the audience. I am Burmese. But the name Moe Thuzar. Thuzar is a romanization of the Sanskrit Suja, which I think in some of the Indian communities you pronounce as Susha. And if you go further on to Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, it becomes Suchara. And so there are, therefore, what's in the name? But there are these different historical, cultural, etymological overlays. And well, I happen to be born in Burma at that time, so yes, I'm Burmese. But there are these influences that go into how one's identity is shaped, even from the time of birth. But when I was 2 years old, my father's a retired diplomat. When I was 2 years old, we were posted here to Singapore. So you could say I started my education in Singapore right at the beginning, going to nursery school here. I guess I can say I also completed my education in Singapore because I came back here to do my master's. A bit of checkered past in between. But anyway, so growing up in this kind of a diplomat's family with a more or less liberal upbringing, you would think that when, and I worked as a regional civil servant at the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta, where the rest of my colleagues at the Secretariat were all nationals from other ASEAN countries. And that's where I met my husband. He's a Singaporean. He too joined the ASEAN Secretariat, and that's where we met and married. And so you would think this is something that, when I break the news of my engagement to my parents, they would be okay with it. My father being a diplomat and all. Now, he stopped speaking to me for 3 months. And why do I say this? It's because of the identity. First, okay, why is she marrying a foreigner? Second, why is she marrying outside of the Burmese race, even though we are part Chinese? So, okay, if it has to be a Chinese, why not a Burmese Chinese? So there are all these layers of identification that come in. And of course, I'm happy to say that it only lasted 3 months, and now my husband is kind of like his favorite son-in-law. Well, he's the only son-in-law, so there's no choice. But what I want to highlight is, I try to make this a joke by saying, yes, my husband and I practice integration at the real personal level. But there are all these differences that you bring to the table, and when you make something work, interactions work, there are all these different identities that come in from your own national, social, historical, political, cultural makeup. And so yes, we're very ASEAN in our marriage. English is the working language. For practical reasons, he's not learning Burmese yet, and for practical reasons, I don't seem to be able to get my head around Mandarin. I'll get there, but anyway. So there are these, I think, working type of compromise, call it as you will, that people have to kind of come at when you decide to put it into a collective effort. And that's what's happening at the ASEAN level. There are different ASEAN committees and bodies that actually go about the business of talking about how do we build a regional identity. And it's mostly through these areas of education, culture, and the arts, through youth exchanges, that these ASEAN intergovernmental processes are trying to make a difference. But I think So coming together as ASEAN is good in the sense that you get to see the face behind the nameplate. You actually get to know the personality of the person rather than just a very impersonal country name of which you may have read of or you have discussed in the newspaper, seen discussed in the newspapers and so on. So apart from all the obvious national framings that we get, I think coming together as ASEAN does help you develop some level of communities of practice. This is what you guys are doing today with the SEAMconference, and I'd love to see the SEAM continue into future years. So that's the first I about identities. The second I, of course, is interests, and I think Prof. Venka has also highlighted this, the different push and pull of the interests at the national and regional, sub-regional levels. The tensions between local and global, and of course it all ranges from your own personal interests to what are your family's interests, what are your community's interests, what are then your national interests, and then what are regional interests. We've seen this played out also at the political level in 2012 when Cambodia, which was chairing ASEAN at the time, failed to reach a consensus on an important statement that ASEAN had to issue regarding territorial claims in the South China Sea. And this was lamented very much as countries not managing to differentiate what was the priority between a regional interest for the whole 10 members of ASEAN versus one's national interests that are, of course, influenced by the kind of economic and political relations that a certain country or a certain government will have with its strong neighbor. So there are all these interests that go in. And let me tell you another kind of ASEAN joke. And this goes back to the time when ASEAN was only 6. Typical kind of stereotyping ASEAN behavior when you try to discuss a difficult issue. Say if a difficult issue is tabled at an ASEAN meeting, the Filipinos will ask, what is the legal basis for that? I think there are more lawyers in the Philippines, maybe that's why. Maybe the lawyers in this audience, the legal students in this audience, can maybe identify with that. So you want to know the legal basis for that. The Indonesians then will say, no, I think we need to understand the philosophical basis, the philosophical motivation for why this topic is being discussed. So that's Indonesia, the deep thinker of the philosophy behind the idea and the longer historical evolution. Our Malaysian friends will say, okay, can I check back with my capital? The Thais would say, okay, this is an interesting idea, but maybe we should study it further, so let's form a committee and investigate it further and discuss it again, the findings at the next meeting. And okay, for my Singaporean friends in the audience, guess what the Singapore delegates' response would be? Okay, I'm going to use one of my rarely learned Singaporeanisms. It will be something to the effect of khaki or not. Which, of course, for the non-Singaporeans, it is something akin to, okay, what's in it for us? I mean, it has to be practical value if we say yes or no. to a decision. So basically, of course, that is ASEAN stereotyping at its best or worst. And it goes on. When Brunei joined, the joke was that the Bruneians would ask, okay, how much will it cost? And so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to say is that all these interests do have to find a convergence. So when we try to find a convergence, it is usually in some kind of regional endeavor or regional position that people work out based on a common shared objective. And that's where I guess the difficulty of forging a consensus comes in. Now, a lot of us will say that ASEAN is all about consensus, everyone will say yes, and therefore it is toothless and it's weak. Having experienced ASEAN negotiations at both sides of the table, I can say that a lot of discussion actually goes on behind closed doors, and there is something akin to voting that also goes on. But what is presented to the public is the agreed position. What ASEAN does is not to wash its dirty linen so much in public, but to present that this is what is the result of extensive or comprehensive discussions. But then again, I think in these evolving times about the push and pull of interest, there is also, I think, new interpretations coming up about how we define interest. And I have to wrap up with the third eye. Which is who are the individuals who give their inputs into all these interests. And of course we have at the regional level, at the government level, we have our politicians. And of course you have academics, researchers, and public intellectuals who also give their inputs that somehow get fed up to policy through what we call track 2 processes. But more importantly, there are people like you. And your voices today, in the 21st century, through the unprecedented channels of information that basically have broadened and flattened the hierarchy of how information is fed up to the policymakers, is a tremendous tool. And I'll stop there and wait for the question and answer session to engage with you more.